Okay, hey everyone. Just give me a second here. So, Sam is just getting ready, and so I am going to be with you guys for the next few minutes. So, in the meantime, does anyone have any initial questions about what we're going to be talking about today in terms of the bureaucracy or anything like that? And if you do, just drop them in the chat and I'll try to get to them. Oh, and for anyone who doesn't know, my name is Fatima. I usually do the current event streams here. So yeah, that is what is up. Let me see how to get this ready. But in the meantime, where are you guys from? I know we have audience from pretty much everywhere in the country. I'm from Texas, so represent. Let me just get these slides loaded up. Oh, cool. Anika's from Arizona. Question, is it cold there right now? Because I'm in Houston and it is not cold here ever. We barely have winter. So just curious. Yo, Dakota's from Dallas. Good to hear. Good to hear. Okay, so okay, so let's just get to it. So this is just going to be a quick review of the executive branch and like what the different kinds of functions of its different like parts are. And so the executive branch can be a little bit complicated if you like don't pay attention in class. And so we're just going to break down that. Okay, so Dakota asks a really good question. Is the bureaucracy separate from the executive, or is it like the Department of Agriculture? So it's the second one. The bureaucracy is a part of the executive branch. So like the State Department, the Department of Agriculture, all of those things are under the executive branch. So if you're not already, make sure you follow Fiveable on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. They're at Think Fiveable. And so we're just going to get right to it. We're going to talk about the bureaucracy and the different kind of bureaucratic bodies, like the cabinet, independent executive agencies, government corporations, and regulatory commissions. Quinn, totally cool that you're fine. You're a little bit late. Happens to all of us. Okay, so question for you guys: what is the federal bureaucracy? What do you guys think it does? And just drop your answers in the chat. So Dakota says it enforces the laws. Okay, yeah. Anika says that it uh, executes, implements Congress's laws. Yeah. So both of those answers are right. And uh, yeah, that's pretty much the bureaucracy's job. Like, so if Congress passes a law that says there has to be a limit of like 200 blah blah blahs per like whatever that can be released into the air to like not pollute it. It's the EPA's job to make sure that companies, corporations are all following those regulations and guidelines, and they can like fine companies that aren't doing it. And so that's what the executive's job is in terms of what the bureaucracy does. And so the bureaucracy has around 2.6 million employees and even more companies that contract with like the government. And so it works to administer the law, and it's part of the executive branch. And so the legislative and judicial branches, they do have influence too, right? Because when we're seeing uh, things like the federal bureaucracy like functioning, especially. Okay, hey Sam, are you?
Hi. I think I got it from here, but thanks for the introduction. I didn't focus on numbers with mine, so I think this is good with the numbers, just to put it in perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I will sign off then. Hi guys. Sam's gonna take it from here.
Okay, it is, let me just figure this out. We're pulling up the slides because my slides are totally different from hers. So the executive branch encompasses like the president and the executive offices with the president with that. Let me see if I can figure this out. Second. Okay, I'm trying to figure out how to get my slides up here. I'm really sorry for the quality of the audio. So in this stream, we will be this audio is really bad. So we'll be focusing on the executive branch and the bureaucracy, which would, so you have the president, the executive office of the president, the executive branch, which is kind of both of these components, the bureaucracy and civil service. The civil service, it is kind of the broadband part of the bureaucracy. Okay, so to be the president, you have to be at least 35 years old, a natural born citizen, and you have lived in the United States for 14 years. To actually become the president, you must win a majority of electoral votes, which is 270 out of 530. So I know some of you are in your classes, you have must know documents for the exam. So some of the documents for the president involve Federal 70, where it argues for a single executive because it's just it goes into details about more about like how everything happens. And then you have Article 2 of the Constitution, which is the power to the executive branch holds in its duties. For the president, you have formal and informal powers. Formal powers are more. Okay, this audio is not really good. So the formal powers of the president is to enforce the law, handle foreign policy, force Congress into session, brief Congress on the State of the Union. So this would be the State of the Union address, which was held last week. Appoint federal judges, Supreme Court justices, ambassadors, and department secretaries, and to negotiate treaties between countries. So there are two constitutional amendments that deal with the presidency, which is the 22nd, which was the president could only be president for 2 terms. And then you have the clause about the vice president, where the vice president can only be president for 10 years. And that was if something happened to the president during one of their terms and stuff like that. The 25th Amendment put up a succession line if the something were to happen to the president. So if something happens to the president, if he like goes into surgery or something and he can't perform his duties, it'll be given to the vice president, and then it'd be to the Speaker of the House, and then there's just a hierarchy after that. So the informal powers of the president, They're not stated in the Constitution, but they are important to carry out the duties of the office. So they're morale builders. The country looks to the president as a leader, so they want to be inspired by them. So, like, if the president doesn't build morale, they're not going to be voted for a second term and etc. They are legislative leaders and coalition builders. So a legislative leader would be more of like telling Congress like what policies they want, and they're going to look into it to present it to Congress and be able to make it be passed. Then they're coalition builders. Well, in Congress, there's multiple parties and stuff like that. But if you don't have a majority to pass a specific bill, the president meets with people and kind of persuades them to form a coalition to form a majority in order to pass the legislation in Congress. They're a policy persuader and communicator. They persuade people like what they want passed, and they communicate this to the public and Congress. With this, you can there's been talk of the bully pulpit, which is under Teddy Roosevelt. He directly appealed to the public in order to pass legislation and make Congress listen to the people. The president is the chief diplomat, and he negotiates with other countries. So you have executive agreements versus treaties. An executive agreement is an agreement between the heads of government of two or more nations that has not been ratified by the Senate. Treaties are ratified by the Senate. The executive agreements are considered politically binding to distinguish them from treaties, which are legally binding. Legally binding means that it's a law and you have to follow it. So the president is the commander-in-chief. So this means the president runs the armed forces. The president cannot declare war. Only Congress has the power to declare war, and the president can only make war. To back this up, there have been restrictions to power. So you have the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act is a congressional resolution designed to limit the president's ability to initiate or escalate military actions abroad. Among restrictions, the law requires that presidents notify Congress after deploying the armed forces and limits how long units can remain gained without congressional approval. So the most that the president can deploy is 10,000 troops for about 60 days, but the president can get a 30-day extension. But with this, we had when Osama bin Laden, they went after Osama bin Laden. President Obama did this before 40 hours, so he didn't need to get Congress's approval in order to execute the mission. So the president can, his check on the legislative branch is vetoing. So the president has 10 days to sign a law passed by Congress. A pocket veto is when the congressional session ends in 10 days and the bill must be signed into law within those 10 days. But the president does not sign it, which would be the pocket veto. The line item veto is more widely used by governors. This would be the president or governor doesn't agree with a specific line or part of a bill, so they just veto that part out. In 1996, Congress gave the president the power of a line item veto, but in the Inez versus Chada Supreme Court case, the Supreme Court ruled it was as an unconstitutional delegation of legislative authority to the president, which eventually struck the president from using a line item veto. A veto is just the power of the president to refuse to approve a bill or joint resolution and prevents its enactment into law. He must also provide reasons why he doesn't want to approve the bill, and Congress can override it with a 2/3 vote. So the president is the chief executive and administrator. So he issues executive orders. An executive order is a signed, written, and published directive from the President of the United States that manages the operations of the federal government and is typically issued to agents of executive agencies. Signing statements are used by the president to show how they interpret a bill in, well, now that it's a law, and how they will enforce the law. Executive privilege is an implied presidential power that allows the president to refuse to disclose information regarding confidential conversations or national security to Congress or the judiciary. So the president has judicial powers, and these would be appointments of federal judges and Supreme Court justices, but these are subject to Senate approval. He can commute sentences, which means to lessen a sentence. You've had legislation passed called the First Step Act, where a lot of drug offenders were able to have their sentence commuted, so they got out in less time than they were sentenced. The president can also grant pardons, and this would a person who's charged with a crime doesn't have that on their record, kind of. We had pardons granted to draft dodgers. In history, it was a big one. So you have checks on power. The judiciary can rule an executive order or action unconstitutional. the president proposes legislation, and then the Senate has to approve it. Then you have how judicial appointments are subject to approval. The Congress can override the veto. They declare war, which provides a check on the president. So in the executive branch, you have the vice president. The vice president really doesn't hold a lot of power. The vice president is used to balance the ticket. So, for example, the presidential candidate will bring someone in from a specific region of the United States to attract voters or to help their campaign. The vice president advocates for the president's agenda. They go out to campaign rallies and are the face of the president's agenda if the president is unable to make it. The vice presidents also sometimes provide valuable insight into the government. Joe Biden had experience in the government, which helped President Obama, who relatively had little experience in the government. You had I have a picture of Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney was strong in foreign policy, which helped President Bush. The vice president, the really only duty the vice president has is that they're the president of the Senate, so they oversee the Senate. And if there is a tie, the vice president votes to break the tie. We have the first lady. The first lady kind of always has a project to take up that helps to better the nation, whether it was healthier school lunches, healthcare reform policy. The first lady is looked to like provide kindness or is like a fashion icon. You have the executive office of the president, helps to carry out the president's administrative responsibilities. So you have policy areas that the executive office focuses on, which is domestic policy, which relates to affairs at home, foreign affairs, which is abroad, and military. The National Security Council is composed of the president, vice president, secretary of state, director of the CIA, and the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff that determines by which domestic, foreign, and military policies can be best integrated for safeguarding the national security. And the NSC is relatively free from congressional oversight. The Domestic Policy Council coordinates domestic policy making process in the White House and ensures domestic policy decisions and programs are consistent with the president's stated goals. It monitors the implementation of the president's domestic policy agenda. They're like the agenda could be from like legislation that's been passed, and they monitor how to best achieve the president's goals. You have O and B, which is the office of Management and Budget. The Office of Management and Budget evaluates, formulates, and coordinates management procedures and program objectives within and among federal departments and agencies. It also controls the administration of the federal budget while routinely providing the president with recommendations regarding budget proposal and relevant legislative enactments. The Council of Economic Advisors is an agency within the Executive Office of the President, is charged with offering the President objective economic advice on the formulation of both domestic and international economic policy. The Council bases its recommendations on the analysis of economic research and empirical evidence, using the best data to use before the president in setting our nation's economic policy. Economics is like a numbers game, and there a lot of trends, and having this research helps you better predict the trends to have an economic policy that best benefits the United States. The U.S. Trade Representative is an agency responsible for developing and recommending United States trade policy to the President of the United States, conducting trade negotiations at bilateral and multicultural levels, and coordinating trade policy within the government through interagency policy staff committee and the trade policy review group. This would be how the United States trade with other countries and how best to maintain those relations, whether to put tariffs on goods or come up with better ways to help with our imports and our exports. The White House staff, their functions are to help the president carry out the role of the chief executive officer. The chief of staff leads the staff of the executive office of the president and advises the president on policy issues. The press secretary is a senior White House official whose primary duty is to act as a spokesman for the United States government administration, especially with regard to the president, senior executives, and policies. They also inform the public of what is going on. I don't think we've had a press briefing in a while. The cabinet are the 15 executive agencies, so it'd be agriculture, commerce, defense, education, energy, health and human services, homeland security, housing and urban development, interior, labor, state, transportation, treasury, veterans affairs, and the attorney general. The cabinet includes the White House chief of staff, has the EPA, Office of Management and Budget, United States Trade Representative, CIA, the Director of National Intelligence and Small Business Administration. So do you have any questions at this point? Okay, since there are no questions, I'm going to move on to the bureaucracy. A bureaucracy is a large and complex system of administration consisting of appointed officials. Bureaucracies feature a hierarchical authority structure, job specialization, and established rules and procedures. The bureaucracy implements, administers, and regulates policies. The people that carry out the duties are commissions, the agents, which are the individual civil servants, and department secretaries, and they oversee the functions of their department. So you have the types of bureaucratic agencies. The cabinet departments are the 15 departments that are headed for secretaries. These secretaries must be approved by the Senate. You have examples are the Department of State, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security. The last created cabinet department was Homeland Security in 2002. The Justice Department doesn't have a secretary, it has an attorney general. Independent regulatory agencies, examples are like the Securities and Trade Commission, the Federal Trade Commission. They're constitutionally part of the executive branch, but operate fairly independent of president control. Most independent agencies are run by commissions of between 4 and 7 members who share power. The president has the power to name some of the commission's members, but since their terms are staggered, they can't directly influence who will be on the commission. If government corporations or an organization that provide a service that could be provided by the private sector and typically charges for services, they run like a business. And an example of this would be the Postal Service. The Postal Service, a lot of their duties can be done by another business like FedEx, UPS, DHL, etc. So you have the implementation of policy. You have discretionary authority, which is an agency's ability to decide whether or not to take certain courses of action when implementing existing laws. An agency's ability to make rules that affect how programs operate and to force states and corporations to obey these laws as they obey these rules as they were laws, which is rulemaking authority. Congress always passes more of like a vague law after it's signed by the president becomes a law. And it's up to the bureaucracy to fine tune those details and be able to create regulations to inform the public and businesses on what they can and can't do. Safe patronage, which is granting favors or giving contracts or making appointments to an office in return for political support. This is known as the FOIL system. It's really big under President Andrew Jackson because he was the president of the common man. And with this, qualified people were kicked out of their positions because of the people who were being appointed. A merit system is a system of public employment in which selection and promotion depend on demonstrated performance. With this, you have to take a civil service exam, and that determines what jobs you're qualified and how you can first go on with your public service. The civil service system, there have been reforms. This would be the Pendleton Act, which is a federal law established in 1883 that stipulated that government jobs should be awarded on the basis of merit. This eventually ended the spoils system. The Hatch Act in 1939 prohibited government employees from active participation in partisan politics. The act forbids federal workers in taking part in partisan political activities. However, they are still allowed to vote in elections. They can't be at work and be campaigning for someone. They kind of emphasize this in Parks and Rec that you couldn't be on the government's property if you were campaigning. The Office of Personnel Management is the bureaucracy's employment agency. The OPM administers the civil service exam, publishes the list of job openings, and hires on the basis of merit. The intent of the OPM is to create a competent and professional bureaucracy. They kind of are like the HR department, and they look at what's going on and how they can better the bureaucracy. A merit system action board investigates charges of agency, corruption, and incompetence. The board also protects whistleblowers. A whistleblower would be someone who there are protections that they can go and blow the whistle on corruption occurring in the bureaucracy, and they wouldn't be terminated, which would be fired because of this. And this was meant to help reform and make the bureaucracy better. So the controls on the bureaucracy, the president appoints agency directors and subheads with Senate approval. Sometimes he or she appoints people who are political allies to these positions. They issue executive orders compelling an agency to do or not to do something, and they either increase or decreases an agency's budget. This is through the Office of Management and Budget. They would give numbers on how much they want to fund a specific agency. There's been a push to lower like the IRS's budget, and this is because it's kind of unpopular with people. Congress revises statutes that establish an agency's mission. They exercise control over an agency's budget, conducts audits or hold hearings, and they influence who will become directors and secretaries because they have to approve them. The people appointed don't necessarily get the position right away. The federal courts, they have limited power but they can exercise control by making rulings, overturning, or supporting acts taken under a federal agency's rulemaking. For the most part, the federal judiciary defers to the agency by requiring that before a case is heard, all administrative remedies must be exhausted. Appeals from administrative rulings are heard by the Federal Circuit Court in Washington, D.C. So last but not least is the issue networks and iron triangles. When I was taking AP last year, my teacher said that iron triangles were going to be a major part of the exam. So it's something that is important to know. So an iron triangle is a term used to describe the relationship that develops between congressional committees, the federal bureaucracy, and interest groups during the policy creation process. The relationship between these people occur naturally over time due to close proximity in which they all work together. They're trying to maximize their gain during their policy process. So a specific group can lobby Congress to pass a law that does something, and then with this it puts pressure on the bureaucracy to implement the law to achieve the goal the lobbyists, which are the interest group, are trying to achieve. Issue networks are networks that consist of people, interest groups on congressional staffs and bureaucratic agencies, in universities, and in the mass media who regularly debate the issues. So I have a picture of the issue of tobacco. So you'd have people who are like specific groups who are for or against tobacco use. You have the staff, like specific congressional members will either come out and support this legislation or promote legislation. And then you'd have the agencies. So with tobacco, it would be like the CDC, which are on the front line of implementing the policy, and the mass media, which kind of shows the debate on this policy. So do you have any questions? So like on the exam, I would definitely know the powers of the president. So that would be the formal and informal. I've seen questions like that pop up, and sometimes they're like comparisons, like whether a specific thing, how the president's power is increased and what the stuff does. The bureaucracy, I would definitely know the orange triangles and the congressional, like the ways the bureaucracy is controlled. I've seen questions like that in my practice and stuff like that from when I took the class last year. I think we're always going to need to know the checks and balances in place. Is there really anything that you'd like reviewed? I would definitely look over key terms and stuff like that. I think looking back, the bureaucracy was something I was strong at. Taking the class, the president, not so much. I did take a quiz on that and didn't do very well. If you're ever struggling, I would definitely look at Khan Academy or get like a review book. I use Princeton Review, and the questions on that are a lot harder than I used from College Board or on the actual AP exam. And it gives practice on what you might see, specific methods you might employ to maximize your points. In the Khan Academy, they give videos reviewing the content, and they also provide interactive questions and stuff, and they go through the free response and other stuff like that. I mean, those are the two sources I've used. I've had a lot of success with that. My teacher last year used the AMSCO AP United States and Government Politics book to help with the class. I use it in AP United States history. It kind of helps to supplement what's going on. It makes it easier to understand. So if you don't have any more questions, I will end this live stream. All right. Thank you for watching, and I hope that this was a great review. And I wish you all the luck in preparing to take the exam and doing well in the class and on the exam. So thank you.